Hi, welcome to Bookie. Today we will unlock the book Capital in the 21st Century. At first glance, you might wonder what this book has to do with Karl Marx's Das Kapital from the 19th century. Add to that the fact that the 21st century is only 20 years old, so why is this book called Capital in the 21st century? In fact, this book builds on the work of Marx's Das Kapital. We can think of Capital in the 21st century as a review of the core ideas in Das Kapital 100 years after its publication. The core idea of Das Kapital is that ultimately there are two problems that capitalism cannot solve. The first is the problem of infinite accumulation of capital, which will lead to an ever-increasing gap between the rich and the poor. The second is the unequal distribution of income, which will inevitably lead to social collapse and revolution. Capital in the 21st century provides a relatively objective evaluation of the value of Das Kapital. The book was an immediate sensation when it was published. Whether in the Western or the Eastern world, people were passionately discussing the book's ideas, and in particular one question: does today's capitalism solve Marx's concerns about fairness? In other words, are things really getting better over time? The premise of this book is a little like the fable of the emperor's new clothes. Mainstream economists have turned a blind eye to the increasingly unequal distribution of wealth. Divorced from social reality and focusing their energy on novel economic models, they are much like the emperor without his clothes. The author of Capital in the 21st century, like the innocent straight-talking child from the fable, has a message for the economic emperors: despite your perceived pedigree, you have missed the most important economic problem: income inequality. We might say that child in this fable is Thomas Piketty, a French economist. Piketty was a child prodigy, smart and very driven. He graduated with a Ph.D. at 22 and became an assistant professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Department of Economics. Piketty found the work of previous American economists rather unconvincing after a number of years studying them. So at 25, Piketty returned to Paris and set out on his own to study capitalist theory. At 31, he was named France's best young economist of the year. At the age of 35, Piketty helped found the Paris School of Economics and served as its first dean. At the age of 43, Piketty wrote the now world-famous book Capital in the 21st Century. The book was described by Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, as the most important economics book of the decade. The book argues that the rate of return on capital has always been higher than the growth rate. This has led to the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, and the gap between the rich and the poor widening. What is more frightening is that as the 21st century rentier class grows stronger, asset inequality will persist across generations as assets are handed down. In most European countries today, the top 10% of the population owns 60% of the total wealth. Within the top 10%, the top 1% owns 25% of the total wealth. Therefore, Piketty suggests that worldwide taxes on assets rather than income should be strengthened in order to address this inequality. To be clear, many of Piketty's claims are summed up by empirical formulas from observed data. This is also where many economists have criticized Piketty's work. The rest of our discussion will focus on the author's analysis of the central economics problem, distributive inequality, which is the book's greatest contribution to contemporary economic thought. Next, let's take a look at the core of Capital in the 21st century in 3 parts. Part 1: Capitalism doesn't really solve the problem of distributive inequality. Part 2: The fundamental contradiction of capitalism. Part 3: How to solve the problem of distributive inequality. Okay, so let's start with the first part. Capitalism doesn't really solve the problem of distributive inequality. Before we discuss this question, we need to answer the first question that may be on our minds. Why are so many of the world's leading economists today not paying attention